So, and with the leaders and especially the people who are dealing with directly with the customers. So the first one is that the market is always providing feedback. The market is always providing feedback. The more apt response to it, because we are responding to the market at all times. Right? And that's the whole idea. We are serving a market. The more apt your response to it, more the specificity. So we have to now get down to specific levels of understanding of how we're going to serve our market. And then that is where more the understanding comes in. That is where your success comes in. So keep taking feedback from the market. The market is always providing that feedback. Get to the specific points, get to the root of it, get to the bottom.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the People Hum interview series. This is your host Neha at Leaders Hum.
People Hum is an end-to-end, one-view, integrated human capital management automation platform, the winner of the 2019 Global Cody Award that's specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work. We run the People Hum blog and channel that receives more than 400,000 visitors a year, and we also publish several interviews with well-known names globally every month.
We have with us today Abha Maryada Banerjee, a business lawyer with expertise in lifestyle shifts via entertainment, which is her vision for social change. Abha is also India's first internationally acclaimed woman motivator, best-selling author on thought leadership, former peak performance and mental strength coach for Olympians who pioneered world-class people-building strategies in India and Asia. As a lawyer, she has been on several legal panels. She's an outthinker, performance expert, corporate educator with special training in people building, lifestyle, and social design. She specializes in strategic interventions on various issues pertaining to people. We're so thrilled to get in conversation with her today for the second time here at People Hum. So welcome, Abha. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you today.
Thank you so much, Sneha. My pleasure too. I mean, I loved the last one, and I think we're going to make it very interesting today.
Yes, absolutely. So to jump right into the interview, Abha,
yes.
When it comes to diversity, inclusion, and culture, you've previously spoken about the 3 Gs, that is
yes.
gender, generational, and geography.
Right.
So we'd love to know more about it.
Sneha, when we talk of culture and we talk of diversity, let me just separate the two. Well, let's talk about culture first. And in every culture, we have various pluses and minuses which people bring to the table. So when we talk about inclusion and diverse teams coming together and forming a company culture, for example, or a social culture, what we are looking for is the kind of good stuff they can bring to the table. So if every culture will have things about them which the other culture doesn't have. So when we work on cultures and we work on diversity and we work on including people from diverse backgrounds or from diverse segments, like different genders, or a different generation, for example, or a geography. Because I've worked in different parts of Asia, and we used to be making teams out of people from just all over the place, and including people from the West who were clueless about how Asian culture worked. So what happens is that when we're talking about inclusion, we have to focus upon what is a particular G. For example, what is the gender bringing to the table? So if we were talking about women leaders, for example, they bring a lot of emotional intelligence, a lot of nurturing, a lot of patience, and a lot of conflict resolution skills to the table. This is a known fact. But if we were to look at a candidate and wonder whether this candidate will be able to do the same thing, we got to test them against the circumstance where they are in. Having said that, when we get more senior people in, because they have the kind of experience that the younger lot is looking for. So that is the generational part that we focus on. And then there's geography. In Asia, for example, there's a saying, they're saying that an Indonesian will be good at this. So a particular geography will be good at this particular thing. A Singaporean will be good at this because that's how they are brought up. That is their culture. And Indian would be good at this. So Indians would be a certain way. If you look at people, there's a judgment, a positive and a negative judgment that goes with people. And people are tested against that. So we bring in the geography. So the cultures, we have created company cultures where we have, like if you, let's talk about the one we just saw, the gentleman who just passed away, the shoe thing. Okay, I'm forgetting the name. They have a culture where, you know, people go in and do their own thing. It's built for their business. So Google will have its own culture, Facebook has its own culture, an Indian company, Reliance, probably has its own culture, though they don't define it as culture. But the West loves to call their culture our kind of culture. So when we mix the two, we realize that, you know, culture is something where people can perform at their optimum levels. And therefore, we bring in diverse segments of people to work together to the betterment of either what's happening situationally or in terms of the results that the company is looking for. So that's how I define the three Gs. There's gender, there's generational, and there's geography. And we've worked with over 20 such corporations where we created internal cultures which were their own culture, work cultures, and their communication cultures. So they say there's this very famous uh, phrase that says culture eats strategy for breakfast. So cultures matter, and the best that Asia has done is they've created their own cultures. So Asian culture and the Western culture is different. So Indian culture and Indonesian culture would be different. Singaporean culture, Japanese culture, you're known for cultures, right? So those cultures matter so much that if we are working in those regions, we have to clearly understand either we follow that culture or we create our own culture. Therefore, diversity and inclusion plays an extremely important role in creating the best teams and getting the best stuff on the table, get the best people on the table, put a good mix out there, and optimize what's going on. That's the whole purpose of this whole culture thing and the three Gs.
I feel like that's a very good way of putting it, because I feel like nowadays a lot of leaders refrain from looking into this whole domain as a whole, because sometimes it can indicate stereotyping. But I feel like what you've just mentioned, and explaining why it is important to understand the culture of a place, which will in turn also decide the way that the employees within that particular culture work. That's why this is important. And I feel like a lot of people will definitely be thinking about this. So thanks a lot for that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's very important, because otherwise, how do you have them work? How do you have them function in a way which is good for everybody? If the functionality shifts,
yes.
your functionality has to be the high end. So high end functionality needs a lot of symmetry, a lot of good stuff happening around, a lot of positivity, a lot of direction, and that cultures make a huge difference when it's done.
And I feel like what makes this a risky topic is people do not tend to approach it wisely. But if organizations need to be at the best of their game, I feel like they should put in that extra effort to be sensitive towards cultures and try to understand
so. I believe so, because I said I've worked with 20 odd corporations who have actually accepted that there is a need for culture change within the organization. Because if you do not put that framework around people who are already, everybody is smart. So I don't say anybody is unsmart. But if you put a framework around that, you allow them space to bring their smartest possible self in front of the work table, right? And that's exactly what any corporate would need.
Absolutely. So as someone who holds expertise in change management, where do you see the post-pandemic workplace heading? And do you have any advice that can help leaders get acclimatized to what is the new normal now?
Oh, there's lots and lots of advice. I think we all are looking for good advice.
We
and
are.
I'm also seeking good advice myself, because working on this every day. My favorite topic is change management, because I think change is one of the biggest constants, as we've all heard before. However, how do we acquire, accept, and acclimatize ourselves to change? How do we change? I mean, I can teach change, but the people in front have to understand what change really, really means. Now, this meaning is totally, I would say, blotched at the moment, because change is a very common word. But it is one of the most difficult things to implement, execute, and have people do, because it requires an absolute overhaul. And it requires a lot of effort on the part of people who are actually involved in it. So it's easier said than done, but the overhaul has to come from people who are at the receiving end of change. And that is where it gets difficult. But otherwise, once you manage change in a stepwise way, or in a processed version, then change becomes easy and measurable. But the post-pandemic space, where everything now has changed to a place where even the courts in the country are looking at a hybrid model of working. So, like, I'm a lawyer as well. So we've been appearing in court as online lawyers. So it's on all hearings are online, and it's nice. It saves time, and it's quick, and it's from your. You can do it from your bedroom, but you will miss the physical aspect of being in a court complex. So I work in the Supreme Court, for example. So now when I visit the court complex is still closed, and until the first week of March, and until then we are all there, but we are not able to appear in courts. We're still sitting in our offices and working online. And now everybody is saying we have to have hybrid models. So the post-pandemic workplace, whether in courts, whether in corporates, is going to be moving towards a hybrid model. A lot of changes are going to come in, and the changes are going to be across not just how the work shifts from online to distance working or work from home or whatever. Apart from that, what is going to happen is people's minds have now shifted to give out performances from multiple places and results from multiple places. Now, that is an aspect which is totally taken as a normal, and it is not normal. Even like I say, I'm looking at the teachers, the way they're teaching kids online. So my daughter is in 12th grade, board exams are going on. The whole year has gone online. So that I am very impressed, and I'm saying the teachers have done a fantastic job because they came online, they taught, and everything has happened online. The schools picked it up very fast. So you see how it's going to shift. The performances are going to shift from there, and everybody who has to perform now in multiple versions. And that is what I think the leaders will have to take care, that the multiple versions are taken care of exactly in the manner that they're supposed to be taken care of. A lot of people cannot do very well online. They're better off in person. People who are better off, some are not good in person but are doing well online. Then there's an offline hybrid version. So the strategic aspect of how work is going to be functioning will change completely. And sometimes it looks as if, once it gets back to normal, things are going to remain the same, or maybe slightly with slight changes, which is what I think everybody would be expecting, because that functions pretty well so far. But I still believe that the leaders will have to look at the new normal from the people perspective. How can they best perform in this new normal? So if the performances are focused on, so we can bring in, say, any number of models which work well from either inside the workspace or outside the workspace, whether online, offline, any hybrid model, whichever way. And that part, and people will need to be taken care of, because after this year, I think everybody is jittery.
Yes.
People want to get back to work, but people are jittery of their own selves. They have lost out on the real world experience of what things are going to be like. A lot of people have lost their opportunities. So it's the mind space is pretty jittery at the moment, and I think the leadership will have to take care of that. As and when people come in whichever manner they come in, it is a very important part of this post-pandemic workspace reality, which will need to be looked into in a very strategic way, that take care of the people. Companies will be looking for results, but look after your people. People will look after the results, and that's how it works. So I think in the last interview, I don't know with you or somebody, I said I was expecting this 3 years from now, because of the artificial intelligence thing coming in. With COVID, it's just preponed to a point where we are now doing most of the stuff from such distances, that we can clearly see that how fast everything changed into, and how AI has jumped in. If you see artificial intelligence, people are now using that part, and the business models are shifting. Most of the people are shifting their business models to, except for the manufacturing, where the physical presence is necessary. But wherever there is a possibility of technology coming in, all businesses are using technology.
Yes.
So I was expecting this 3 years from now, when the artificial intelligence bomb would have busted, and all that talk was going on, how it will change the workplace, will people be laid off, how will how people will communicate with each other, what machines are going to take over, what kind of work. It's happened now. So it's like we got the shock before we were ready for it, but for good reasons. I think what it has done to us is that it has opened our minds to the changes, and people have actually, I must say, uh, kudos to all of us. And
Yes.
I believe that all of us took to it in a very, very positive way. Initially, it looked, how will we manage? But I think
Yes.
within 2 months' time, everybody has moved in. And that is a good thing. So you see, the change part is a possibility for all of us. Why get pushed into a change situation? Why don't we understand that we are capable of changing? And if the change situation comes, we will. And we'll do the best of
Exactly.
it. We'll make the best of it. Strategic shift in the way the leadership will have to deal with what's
Absolutely.
coming up now,
Yes.
because the capacities have shifted. If you see, the capacities have actually expanded.
Mhm.
What you were already doing, you're already doing, but now you're working on expanded capacity,
Yes.
expanded styles. There is an expanded version of everything. There is a new version of everything. There is also innovative versions of everything. So now people have gone through that. So there is a big possibility that uh, workplaces, job profiles, and what people are bringing to the table will also be redefined to a
Yes.
large
Yes.
extent. And if that is done on a strategic level, I think the chances of any disturbance will be minimized. It should be done on a strategic levels, leadership level, so the definitions can be reframed to a
Yes.
point where all these new skills can be either included or added or become part of the new normal without making it sound like any new job portfolio or something. But people have learned new skills. We've all become better at what we were just doing for chit chat.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we are very interested to learn your take on female talent development. And additionally, what do you think women as activists can do to uplift other women at the workplace?
Okay, so this is two-part question. I'll answer for
Yes.
you. One is female talent development. So we have I am an author on women's leadership, and I do leadership seminars for women leaders as well as women succeeding from executive roles to leadership, and otherwise working with women leaders who are on at some middle to top level executives who are preparing to get into leadership position. Wherever, I mean, this is not just in India, all over the world, female talent is now being nourished, nurtured to take on leadership roles, because the succession process for otherwise women to get into leadership position was never there. It was not, it was very, very, it was a chance thing. You can get to a top level, but you will not get into a leadership position. So that's where we were stuck. So what we've done in the female talent development is that we start the process early. So when you get in there, if you're in a middle level position and there is the company or the corporate is interested in uh, training you for a leadership position, which is not just through the job, but through your development as a person or as a leader as well. We work through that through our seminars, our coaching, our talent development team is there, which actually sits with these corporates and gives them solutions around how to train their women for bigger roles, or the entire women staff or employee segment is taken aside, not because they can't be doing this training that happens for everybody, but women by themselves need to be just identified, to be told that you are ready for a leadership position or what all can you do for them, instead of doing it in a mixed group. So what we do is we take them aside, and we have permissions from the companies who tell us that we are now nurturing these people for this for this for this. So if, for example, I have 100 people in the room, 10 of them are going into a middle level, 20 are going into the executive position, and then the top shelf is going for going into a global space, and they all 40 of them have to be trained into bigger leadership roles. So we work through that group and use group dynamics to train women within a women's sphere, and then they are now taken, after that we're taken into a mixed sphere where they can test their skills and understand what are their strengths, where should they play from, what kind of things they can add to their portfolios, and as a leader what they need to still work on, where are the gaps. So we work with them to identify those gaps. We tell them how to work through those gaps, if at all. What can they do if there is a gap? And then what can they add to themselves in terms of where they stand now, and on, if they were to move on a scale of 1 to 10, how do they get to a 10? So there is a process to it, and I'm very, very keenly working on these female talent development, because I think is one of the most uh, important needs at this point of time, because
Absolutely.
of the education that women have already got. But in the social sphere, they still are a little bit in the background. So that gap needs to be fulfilled and, the bridged, number one. Number two, once they get into a corporate, I think they are doing fantastic work over there. But when it comes to moving forward in terms of developing that talent for any further succession for a higher role or a leadership role, then either the process is what is existing in a company, or if the company gets interested, because a lot of companies are now, creating a percentage of women in executive positions or higher positions. That's a good sign. And there, it really, really works very well that women are developed on an individual level as well, not just
Yes,
on the
yes.
company level, because ultimately their individual level, their strengths at an individual level will make them the leaders. So that's where it is. Your second part, and we do this as a strategic intervention. We do this as a strategic intervention, female talent development, because sometimes it's project basis. So there's a particular project which needs more women, especially for companies which are in consumer durables. There are a lot of time the women workforce is dealing with the customer also. So now we have to understand that part, and as a strategic intervention, then we train these women or develop these women to deal with the customer, especially the woman customer. So depending upon what we are dealing with, we create these strategic interventions which are very customized to whatever we are dealing with, and they have been very, very successful so far. The second part is about your activist question, that how can women activists help uplift other women at workplace? See, activism is a word which is not usually used in the corporate sector.
Yes, it's not.
We don't like that word in the corporate sector. We like peace. You know, talk activism and they say, thank you very much, Abha, we don't need you over here. But activism I would say the activists, people who are in that space, and I have had some privileges there, because I don't call myself a women activist, but I get invited on television as a person who can speak on some kind of women activism.
Mhm.
But that's mainly for women empowerment. So what can we do for women empowerment? But when it comes to activism, I believe it is. I wish that the issues related to workplace were brought in the common areas where people could actually see that women face these issues.
Yes.
So it should not be a boardroom talk. It should not be a TV station talk. It should not be a business channel talk. It should be a real talk. But it needs to be a very peaceful activism. The moment you get activism into the
Yes.
corporates are get very hassled by the word
The
that
word. Yes.
people are trying to push an agenda for women to disrupt or disturb work inside an organization, which is not the. So I would probably not use this word, but I would say probably um, we say CSR, right? Corporate social responsibility. So in my book, I've talked about CWR, corporate women's responsibility. So women in the organization and the responsibility of the organization in terms of developing that female talent, so that not just they work for the company, but their own lives and the lives of many other women can then, so they become the activists within the organization. So those are the people who are going to be pushing more women up. Those are the people who will be inspiring women outside of organizations to say, okay, there is a space for you, that you can do this over here, or you can achieve this over here. So the activism, if it all has to come, I think from within the corporate space. And there are a couple of good people over here who are working on women's leadership. Like I am one of those inside people, I think, who has pushed for women's leadership, not just in terms of making noise around it, but actually creating solutions around it. Let's create solutions. I'm sure everybody knows we need women leaders, but then how do we get to that point? That is the point. So I think it is an internal activism from within the organizations, which would be a positive activism, a supportive activism, an optimistic activism, what do you call major shift creating activism, which can actually create a very beautiful culture within organizations, and where women are in positions where they can make a bigger difference to the organization.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's how it is.
So, Ava, this is very brilliant initiative, and I feel like all of us need that helping hand that can guide us to get to where we want to, and that's especially more important for women at the workplace. So, I am really glad to hear that you're doing something towards it, and I'm sure that our listeners and viewers are definitely taking notes right now.
I hope so too. And I hope they're all women and also men. Please, if you're listening, please make notes.
Please take notes. Yes.
Please take those notes.
So, you've also spoken about emotional fitness for corporates. So we'd love to know what your insight has been with respect to an evolving workspace in terms of emotional well-being.
You've asked all my favorite questions. So yeah, emotional fitness for corporates is a term that I actually started using way back in 2009, 2010. And it was a new term, but I had worked in Asia. So Asia was teaching men emotional intelligence, so
Wow.
that men leaders can have that intelligence to and as leaders you need to develop some level of emotional intelligence to deal with people, men and women both, and in different geographies. You require that sense of knowing what an emotional intelligent or leader should be doing and how it helps your leadership position. So when I said emotional fitness, all corporations are working with people, right? So people come with their emotions when they come to work, and therefore each person's fitness would affect the fitness of the organization, right? So that is why we were trying to put the maths together way back in 2010, and I said, how do we measure this? We have to measure, and in an evolving workspace, emotional fitness, I think the training around with emotional fitness has become so important that instead of training men in emotional intelligence, people actually, some corporates at our advice, brought in some very powerful and very empowered women into the workspace, so they brought in the emotional intelligence. But the fact that fitness, uh, emotional fitness for corporates is an important part, because emotion is the key to all motion and all action. If people are not emotionally fit, or if people are not emotionally ready, or if people are not emotionally powerful enough, their actions are going to affect the performance of the company. So we all come trained, because everybody comes into a job very well trained and very well checked, whether they are in a position to perform or not. But still, we are like, as HR, you are in HR, we are in HR. So HR works through this, because we keep doing appraisals to check people's performances. Why do we do that? We do that exactly for this reason, because there are some aspects of a personality which are not seen through your biodata, through your CV, and that is your emotional fitness. And that shows through your appraisals, performance appraisals. It shows through your the way you take action. It's your decision making power. It's your working in teams properly, and all that is tested through your performance appraisals, right? And that's part of emotional fitness. So once we begin to work on those things in an evolving company, it's a very important part that when people come, their happiness quotient within the organization should be very high. So it's not just about the money. Now today, the new millennial generation is looking for doing something worthy. They are not just looking for money; they're looking for something which gives them freedom. So there's the whole trajectory of what people are looking for is changed, and therefore, if the people inside the organization and the leadership does not focus on people being emotionally fit, and it's a very powerful thing, because then people stick to the organization when they realize that it is a possibility for them to feel better inside the organization. Otherwise, it's like two ends. This is the organization, this is your employee. You're working for the organization, but they're actually the two opposite ends of the same stick. And one is supervising the other one is giving something, but there's this sparring goes on. So emotional fitness actually makes the things so much more smoother. uh, Communications become very powerful. Your what do you call goal setting, aims, teams, people working together gets very powerful, and people begin to aim for bigger stuff. So it
Yes.
automatically affects the results, which are part of the evolving organization. So when we look at just the bottom line and ignore the people and what people really need to perform well, that's being emotionally fit. So an emotionally fit organization will need emotionally fit people as well. So that should be included in part of as part of their trainings, or whichever way they want to look at it.
Absolutely. I feel like that definitely does put a lot of things into perspective because, like
Yeah,
you mentioned, our emotions are at the root of everything we do, and what we do affects our coworker, right? So that
everything.
that
Yes.
that cannot be avoided at all. And I also
It
do want
affects
to
you.
mention
Sneha,
it
first person
affects
is affected is you, and then you take it and give it to everybody else.
exactly. So
You
it's
know,
like a
so
domino effect.
it's a very basic thing that we do every day. However, we don't sort
Absolutely.
of look at it in this manner.
Yes. It should be given the due importance that it
Right,
deserves.
right.
And I feel like with this pandemic, a lot of people are talking about mental health. And the fact that this is something that you and your organization thought about 11 years ago, I
Yeah,
feel like that's absolutely commendable. And I should definitely mention that.
thank you.
Amazing.
Yeah, yeah. I really believe mental health, and I think the answer to mental health is not psychologists, not psychiatrists. The answer to mental health is mental strength. You know, mental health can be literally, I would say, if I can say, use the word literally, can be taken 10 notches up if we are able to build mental strength in people so that they can handle their mental health issues. You
Yeah.
know, they develop a personality which does not get into a mental health issue. So if it comes, you have the strength to deal with it. So I say my answer to any mental health issue is to develop mental strength.
Absolutely. So I am kind of sad that we've come down to the last question today because I do
Okay,
not want this conversation to end.
so am
But
I
do
sad?
you
Yeah.
but do you have a quote that defines your feelings the best way about the future of work, workplace, and you?
Let me share two with you. These are both my things that I use in my leadership seminars. So and with the leaders and especially the people who are dealing with directly with the customers. So the first one is that the market is always providing feedback. You know, the market is always providing feedback. The more response to it, because we are responding to the market at all times, and that's the whole idea. We are serving a market. The more apt your response to it, more the specificity. So we have to now get down to specific levels of understanding of how we're going to serve our market, and then that is where more the understanding comes in. That is where your success comes in. So keep taking feedback from the market. The market is always providing that feedback. Get to the specific points, get to the root of it, get to the bottom, because your experience through this is not only going to add to the quality of the knowledge, quality to your knowledge, number one, and quality to your experience with your this thing and the workplace. It's very, very important part of taking market feedback. And the second one that I want to share here is that now that we're in the post-pandemic phase, in maybe 2 months' time, we all have gone through some level of change. We have all felt challenged. We've all tried to beat the challenges in our own ways. So I think one of the things that I have always spoken of, and I like that idea so strongly, that facing challenges needs a mindset. It's not about this challenge. It's about your mindset through a challenge of assuming this is, we need a mindset of assuming 100% responsibility to turn it around and rig it in our favor. And which is what I think as a country we have done during this pandemic year,
Yeah.
that the leadership was there. They took 100% responsibility. They literally turned it around. We are amongst the very few countries in the world who've done better than the West to turn it around and rig it in our favor. The vaccines are coming out of our country, and we are sending off people's to save people's lives, uh, COVID vaccines across the world. So when we begin to thrive in this kind of chaos, that kind of 100% responsibility should be taken up by everybody post this experience of the pandemic, that we could change, number one, and but we could also face the challenge. And if we
Yeah.
assume 100% responsibility, it just takes some time. There is a process. Let's turn it around and rig it in our favor. And that's the important part. We begin to turn chaos into creativity when we start thriving in chaos. So chaos is, I think, part of life. We see it every day in some form or the other. But we just, when we see chaos, we don't like chaos. We like everything nice and,
Yes.
hunky dory. But that it's not. Life is not like that. I think COVID has taught all of us that.
And I feel like the best way to remember this is that it is up to us to change that chaos into something which is not so chaotic.
I think let's make it a principle of life that we're going to turn chaos into creativity. We are going to thrive in
Absolutely.
chaos. So you can keep moving forward instead of stopping. Most people would say, "Oh, chaos, stop, stop, stop. Not the right time to do things." No, move forward through chaos. learn to thrive in chaos, and then chaos doesn't sound like chaos. You come up with something interesting. That's it.
Absolutely, Abha. I don't feel like there could have been a better note to end this interview on. So I really want to thank you for your time and for being here with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sneha. My pleasure.